So, good morning, and thanks for being here today. Uh, the idea for this week is we're going to look at the same story we did with the kids, which is Abraham's binding of Isaac, and how we're supposed to hold that for ourselves. It's kind of a crazy story in some ways, that the way it's written, but when we dig into what Swedenborg says this story is about, he gives us basically three different levels of meaning this story has. And the one I want to focus on today is one that, applies to our life. And he talks about it in terms of sanctification, the sanctification of the rational mind. And I'm going to save you the trouble of asking you, do you know what sanctification means? It's a fancy religious word, and it essentially means to make something holy, or the definition that I relate to better is where it says, to put something aside for God's service. You think about it in practical terms. Holy Supper bread, right? We put this aside and we bless it and we do something to put it in service for God. It's separating it so that it's ready to go. And I think we're familiar with the idea of making something fit for service. If you've got a crappy old car sitting in your yard and you say, oh, well, I want to drive this again. Well, you got to fix it up and make it fit for service for the road, right? If you have some old stuff in your house, you say, oh, well, I want to use this. You got to go and fix it, clean it up, get it ready, make it fit for service. And that's what sanctification is about. And in this case, it's about making your mind fit for service for God. And as we said with the kids, Isaac has this representation of a rational mind. It's a mind that's developing, and it's Isaac's 13 when this story happens. So we start to think that, okay, this mind comes online around age 13, give or take. Takes 75 more years for Abraham to pass. So it takes 75 more years for Isaac to get his full inheritance. So it gives you an idea that this process doesn't happen just because the preacher says to the kids, oh, well, here you go, boys, this is how you do it. No, this takes a long time. And it's about, again, making your mind fit for service to God. In order to do this, we have to give up some things. So I was trying to think of some stuff, what are some examples in life where we've had to give up some things that were of a good childhood state. That's what Abraham is. He's good. There's nothing really wrong with Abraham. But to go to the next level, you've got to see the world differently. You're going to see the world differently. And I thought of an example that came to me in my life several years ago. 10, 12 years ago now, I guess. When I was a kid, the story in the Word that meant the most to me was the story of Moses and the Exodus. And I think this has to be because I remember watching the Charlton Heston 10 Commandments movie as a kid, and this was powerful. I loved it. It was a cool movie, and it was on TV probably about once a year, and you could see, the finger of God just coming down and going boom, boom, boom. Moses was a cool cat, right? He just waltzes right into Pharaoh's office. He says, buddy, this is the way it's going to be. You're either going to let us go, or you're going to get slammed. And Pharaoh and his arrogance. I have a thing for arrogant villains. That's kind of my thing. And so Pharaoh, played by Yul Brynner, was just fantastic. And loved that movie. And I loved the idea of the finger of God coming down and doing something. And fixing things. And making things right. And participating that way in the world. That was my childhood experience. But what happened was, early 2000s, mid-2000s, I came across this documentary called Exodus Decoded. And I think I showed it here several years ago. And it was basically this idea where this archaeologist, this biblical archaeologist, goes through and says, oh, how do we explain all these plagues? The plagues can actually be explained by the eruption and subsequent fallout of a volcanic eruption. So when Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, Pharaoh, I'm going to turn the water to blood unless you do what I say, Pharaoh says no, and Moses turns the water to blood. This guy's saying, well, the water didn't actually turn to blood. That's what they thought happened, but what really happened was all this red sediment from the volcano came and was flooded into the waterways, and so it looked like it was blood, but it wasn't actually blood. God did not take his finger down and go, boom, water to blood. And he goes on and says, well, this makes sense because the second one was what? Frogs come out of the river. Well, the frogs are going to come out of the river if the water's got all this garbage in it. And, he just keeps on following down the line. And yes, because of all the pestilence, the cows are going to get sick, and they're, it just follows on from this same starting point. And for me, this was like a faith-shaking moment. What? What do you mean? What do you mean God didn't just sit there and whoosh, we're going to move the water to the side and we're going to smite you guys with hail and brimstone with fire? Come on, this is the way God works. He's a tough guy. He's not going to take any nonsense from anybody. Boom. It was a lot of adjustment to say, well, what if this guy's right? Could be. And what has to go away is this childhood understanding of God. Oh yeah, we like it as a kid as the God who's all powerful can throw lightning bolts down at the bad guys. People who are our enemies and people who are on the other sports team, he can get them because we're the champions, we're the best. But as we get older, this rational mind is supposed to see things from a view of going, oh, you know what, God doesn't actually work that way. God doesn't punish the evil kind of do it to themselves. God's not about vengeance. And God can actually work within his own system. He doesn't have to literally put his finger on the pot. He can just sit there and say, you know what, we can have everything set up in advance so that these natural events can occur and the people are in place with a perspective that see this story and record it in the way that the symbolism all holds out. It's a different way of seeing the finger of God acting in our lives. It's like almost the clockmaker type view. But he still interferes, just not quite the way it is appearing there. This is the sanctification of the rational mind, of seeing something spiritual, right? Because the rational is this middle level. Higher you have kind of a heavenly view, and then below you have a natural view. And so if the rational mind it's from the word ratio, and seeing things in contrast to each other and prioritizing. So you're prioritizing, okay, well the spiritual view, the higher view is that God loves everybody. He doesn't punish the bad. The bad do it to themselves. He wouldn't throw an earthquake at the bad guys even if we would like him to. So we take this higher perspective, and from that we see the natural world in a different way. And what can be the temptation is to discard all the spiritual and stick with just what we see. That's how we inform our world and our life. And this story is saying, no, you've got to take this mind that you're being given, this sun, this thing you love more than anything, the ability to understand and rationalize about the world, you've got to take that and make that fit for service. You've got to use that in a way that it enlightens the way you see the world and raises you up. And yeah, in time, Abraham has got to go. In time, Abraham's inheritance will become yours. You will trust and obey still, but you'll trust and obey from a different point of view. That's what this story is really about. It's this process of sanctification. So when Isaac is being led up this mountain It's part of the process of, gathering the stuff, gathering all these things, and preparing for this moment. You're going to go to the mountain. Mountain is about the truth that the Lord's trying to give us. Takes time to get there. And when Swedenborg gets into the specifics about the internal meaning of this story, he talks about it in the way that all of the process to get to the moment where Abraham has got the knife in his hand, the boy on the altar, everything's ready to go. Everything is about this temptation. And up to that point, it's just preparation. Once Abraham has the knife, Swedenborg says, that was it. It was done. The process was complete because the intention on Abraham's part was there. And so Abraham passes the test, as it were. He says that part of the way this went down the way it was is because Abraham himself, from cultural ideas, had the idea that sacrificing your child was a good idea and that God would praise you for that. It's one of those false beliefs that's brought into the picture here and believed, and that's why it was used. But you also know that Isaac survives. God doesn't want us to sacrifice Isaac. And we can take this on a literal level and on a spiritual level. He doesn't literally want us to sacrifice our sons, and he doesn't want Isaac to go away. But he does want that mind fit for service. What happens after that is the ram is spotted, and its horns are entangled in a thicket. The picture is the thicket is natural knowledge. The horns are the power of the ram, the activity of the ram. And so he's saying that what can happen is we go through life as a person who wants to be a conscience-oriented person, someone who lives their life according to trying to say, this is right, this is wrong, conscience-oriented and making the right choice. We can get entangled with our natural knowledge and get stuck in it. And so what Abraham's doing by taking this ram and sacrificing it is saying, okay, I am willing to give up my natural knowledge and put that on the altar to the Lord and say, that's what can go. I'm willing to come at it from a higher point of view. I've got Isaac, the ability to see the higher and use that to inform the lower and not make this ram the all and be all. That's the basic gist of this story, is this process of making the mind fit for service. Or the gist of the story for us. Swedenborg gives us these other levels, and he says one of the things, and I'm not going to read the whole number here, it's Secrets of Heaven 2802. What he's getting at here is you can see the emotional content in this story. And that whenever you see emotional content, it's about love, and therefore it's something for the highest angels. He says the celestial angels, everything in their world is about love. For those of us in the next level down, it's going to be about this conscience orientation. You've got to think about it. Is this the right thing? Is this the wrong thing? You make a choice. But for them, it's all about love. And he's saying that this story, when they hear it, they hear that emotional content. Oh no, Abram has this only son. He's got to sacrifice him. And oh my gosh, this is such a terrible moment for him. They probably see the wide eyes of young Isaac going, oh, Dad, where's the lamb? It's probably an innocent. Where's the lamb? He trusts his father, right? Where is it? God will provide my son. And they hear the pain in Abraham's heart as he says this and go, oh, son, I don't want to do this. The celestial angels pick up on this. And you can think of many other stories that have that heavy emotional content. We have one with Hagar and her son fleeing from Sarai. So that's one level of this. Another level he gives us is about how it applies to the Lord himself, and how Jesus had his process of regeneration, and that the slaying of Isaac in this case talks about removal of the merely human, Swedenborg calls it, the stuff that comes from the human mother Mary, and sacrificing that side of him instead of the divine side, and letting the divine side come through Jesus and letting that illuminate him as opposed to letting the natural side come through. So these are the main levels to this story. And again, I think for us in our day-to-day life, the teaching and the practicality is really about saying, I'm making this part of my life fit for service in God's kingdom. I'm holding it aside. I'm going to sanctify myself. And in doing so, I'm willing to trust that what the Lord tells me is true, even though there might be some appearances mixed in there. That's the kind of the last piece I didn't mention, is that coming from the Isaac point of view, it still operates in a world of appearances. Not everything is actually true. Only the Lord has that. But he's saying, even though I don't understand everything, I'm going to trust, I'm going to obey. And when you do, everything turns out okay. Amen.